first things first, first question I always ask everybody, and you've gotten it, I'm sure, a million times. Why are you running for mayor? What was the why make this decision to run for mayor?
Oh, that's a good question every time it comes up. I've dedicated my entire life and career to helping historically marginalized, low-income Black and Brown communities overcome the barriers and obstacles to, being able to live in dignity and having access to economic stability and, educational opportunity. And I've been pretty successful in that work, actually. But after a while, you realize that you're kind of dealing with the back end. It's the symptoms, and there are other bigger structures and systems at play that generate the need. And I think that I decided that my personal experience as a first generation Black Latina single mother, who dealt with and navigated some of those things on my own, while also helping in my career other people overcome those things. I decided that this was a good way for me to try to have a bigger impact at a larger scale, and to begin to address some of those systemic and challenge and structural issues. And also, why not? I mean, for so long that electoral politics have precluded the engagement of a lot of people who actually need the representation the most. And so I think it's time for us to tackle that head on as well.
Dianne, when we talk to all these candidates, and we talk to a lot of these candidates in this very crowded field, a lot of people,
Sure.
like you just did, point to their life experience and their personal experience as being something that would, make them a good choice as mayor. What about your personal and your life experiences do you feel makes you the ideal candidate for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in a blue collar working class family. My dad was a union member, and first generation, meaning I've talked about this the other day. Like, my dad didn't have running water at his house growing up. He didn't have electricity in his house growing up. He had a dirt floor for a lot of his childhood, and as a first generation New Yorker here, I had to navigate and the education system. And I watched as so many of my peers from the community were left behind because they were left out of the system. I watched as many of them, got involved with drugs or, the criminal legal system. And I got access to opportunity, and I saw the impact that made on my life. And I saw the difference that it made. And so, when I talk about living it, I've lived it, right? And I also, as a single mother in the system, both of my children had learning differences. I had to navigate the Department of Education and sue the Department of Education to get my kids the basic things that they needed. And my son's also been a victim of racial profiling from as young as the age of 10, because he was a tall brown boy. So those are the experiences I talk about. And I think a lot of New Yorkers, when they meet me and talk to me, they go, oh, wow, like we have so much in common. And I think that is a distinct distinguishing factor from me and the other candidates in this race.
Fair enough. Obviously you're going to be taking over, if elected, you'll be taking over for Mayor Bill de Blasio, who,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people think some people think he's doing a great job, other people not so much. Your thoughts
Yeah.
on how the job that the mayor has done pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, the overall thing, and
Yeah.
what would you do differently if elected?
Yeah. So I've been disappointed in the execution. I think that a lot of us had a lot of hope at the beginning of this administration. There was a lot in the articulation of the vision that was compelling, but the execution, I think, has been challenging. And this is what I think is also a sort of distinguishing factor, right? The mayor is actually an executive. It's an executive role. It's a management role. You have to be able to lead, not just by helping to, articulate a vision that people can feel and buy into, but also being able to execute on that. And I think for me, I have 25 years of experience in leading large, diverse teams, large, diverse organizations, in getting everybody in the organization to feel bought into that vision, to understand the role that they play, the value that they bring, and to executing on that. And that's both an art and a science in terms of doing that. I've also managed budgets where the reimbursements were 80 cents on the dollar. And so, closing that gap while also growing the organization is a critical skill that's going to be necessary for the next administration, because we are going to have some budget challenges. But I don't believe they're insurmountable. I think they require smart executive leadership. And that's what I bring to the table. And that's what I've been doing my entire career.
And those budget challenges you spoke of are going to just be made worse by what we've gone through over the last, year and a half now with this pandemic and everything that's going on there. You've said, and you've mentioned that, you don't want to bring New York back to what it was before the pandemic. You want to go forward. You want to change things here. Why is that? Why do you feel like that's in the best interest of the city? And what would you change?
So, I think one of the things that's interesting, like the pandemic has both laid bare inequities and injustices that existed long before COVID-19, but it's also exacerbated those injustices. And you see that both in terms of who was running the city. In the middle of last summer, when things were really bad, it was our already marginalized, low income Black and brown folks that were keeping the city operating. It was those folks who were delivering our meals at home, who were stocking the shelves in the groceries stores, who were, cleaning our subways. And so, I feel like what we've seen is the foundation of what led to 2020 the way it was. And so the idea of going back to that is accepting those inequities and those injustices as just the status quo. I don't want to go back, and I've said I refuse to go back. I think this rupture in the system that took place in 2020 offers us a window of opportunity to make a decision, to see very clearly what existed, and to make a decision that no, that's not right. It's not just. It's not equitable, and we're going to build a new New York City that actually elevates our most vulnerable, because we recognize the collective interdependence between us, and want a city that is better for all of us, and want to live up to the rhetoric of being the greatest city in the world. And I think that's how we do it.
Part of your platform is your major plan seems to be this quality of life essentials plan. That's something you talk about often. How would that help New York City residents? What do you want people to know about that?
We've been grappling with COVID-19. We've been grappling with the economy. We've been grappling with increasing homelessness and public safety. All of these things are inextricably linked. You can't deal with one thing successfully without also dealing with the others. And so, my quality of life essentials plan actually speaks to the idea of taking care of those basic human needs, of providing housing for everyone, of making sure that everyone has access to the economic resources and stability that they need to live in dignity, right? So if you have a job, you should be able to have that job and provide for your family. That job should pay you enough to provide for your family and live in dignity. The education system, everybody should have access to a quality school, no matter what zip code they live in, no matter what borough they live in, no matter what their family lineage. So these things are just the basic sort of foundation and stepping stool to being able to live in dignity. And public safety, right? The public health, public safety, and housing issues, those are all linked, and we need to be able to provide people with the basics so that they can access that. And that's what that means to me. And I think that we can rebuild and build a New York City with a focus on that and be better than we've ever been before.
To that end, and with the housing crisis and what we've been dealing with as far as that's concerned, it was an issue pre-pandemic and a major issue.
Sure was.
The pandemic. It's only been made worse over this last year. How bad is it now, and how can we in any way fix it?
Yeah, I mean, it has skyrocketed. And we know that, and we're talking about that. And again, I'm going to keep saying this. You can't deal with public health or public safety without giving people housing. And so we need to be looking at all of the vacant hotel spaces. We need to be looking at vacant apartments. We need to be looking at vacant storefronts. We need to allow for a flexibility in zoning and a repurposing of spaces so that we can use those to house our homeless. But fundamentally, we also have to deal with and get under control the housing market in New York City, the housing market that is so increasingly unaffordable, despite the focus on affordable housing that supposedly took place over the last 8 years. We need to move away from the speculative market that really commodifies housing and move towards a model that embraces the city's role and responsibility in providing housing and increased social housing. We should be looking at cooperative housing, expanding community land trusts, really sort of bringing housing into the communities and giving communities greater control, rather than maintaining this model where developers and for-profit entities drive the process and have so much control over it.
Another issue, like you mentioned, that has been brought up by the pandemic has been public safety, and specifically the issue of police reform. It's been a major thing that people have talked about a lot. I've noticed you don't say defund the police, you say something different, but you obviously talk about, again, the reallocation of resources when it comes to that. Where do you stand on police reform, and what would you want to do?
Yeah. So actually, I was the first mayoral candidate to call for defunding the police. That is the language that I have used. I've also talked about, to help make it clear to some people who have a reaction to that, as much as I stand by it, I talk about divesting and reinvesting, right? The police budget is bloated. We have seen the harm that police inflict on Black and Brown communities and peaceful protesters in particular, especially over the last year. And also, we also know that policing and public safety are not the same thing, that communities that are most heavily policed are not, in fact, safer. And so, what we know is that what increases the safety of a community is a community that has access to resources and programs and supports that is rich in alternatives for, whether you're dealing with mental health issues or homelessness issues or substance abuse issues. You should have the programs and services that you need to address that. You shouldn't be, you shouldn't have a man with a gun responding to those situations. So that's the first thing. I've also called for the creation of a community first responders department that would actually be staffed with people who are trained in intervention and de-escalation in those situations, because there's so much, we know that there's such a large percentage of calls that the police respond to that are not, in fact, crimes in progress. So I think that those are some of the steps that we need to take to move away from the current situation. We've seen this increase in crime, but we've also seen we can't decouple that from the increase in need and the increase in vulnerability that our communities have been experiencing over the last year.
To that end, is there more that can be done to try to get guns off the street, to keep them out of the hands of people who are using them, obviously not just to commit violence, but to just basically terrorize communities all across the city?
Sure. I mean, I think that we've seen models of violence interrupter programs across the city that are, funded in small pockets. And we've seen the success of those models in terms of intervention on the ground. That whole idea of a peer, of someone who, who is culturally relevant and culturally sort of aligned with the young people or whoever, intervening and sort of, addressing those situations. I think there's more we need to do from a legal perspective in terms of the trafficking of guns and that kind of thing. And we need to make it safer for people to feel like they can turn in their guns, the buyback programs, those kinds of things. But I would always start with community focused and community oriented interventions that draws on the strength of and the assets of communities as they are, because every community has strengths and assets that we should be building on.
I want to talk about the education system and what we've been dealing with here, because obviously, again, another issue that came to light during this pandemic, whether you talk about the way the school system was handled during the pandemic or the digital divide that was obviously brought to light more, so that there are a lot of people who don't have access to broadband, who don't have devices that they need to take advantage of this remote learning. What are your thoughts on the state of the education system right now? How can it be improved quickly next year when a new mayor takes over, and if that's you?
Yeah. So the state of the education system is so rooted in racism and oppression. It's problematic to begin with. And I think, the first thing I'll say on this, and I said it the other night at an education forum, is there's been so much damage done to our young people. We really have to focus on healing. We really have to focus on creating schools that are spaces where our children feel seen, heard, valued, and loved. And that's not been the case for so many. But, you know, I have to admit that last spring, when I sort of could read the writing on the wall in terms of where we were going, I was shouting into the void about what we needed to do. And, you know, I thought that we needed to close schools sooner. I think that we need to partner with a lot of community-based institutions, human service organizations, CBOs, community-based organizations, arts and cultural institutions. And we should actually expand the footprint of the public school system so that we're using these spaces that are largely vacant right now, you know, largely underutilized, that are probably better ventilated than our DOE spaces and buildings, that have access to technology, so that we can prioritize our children who are struggling the most, our homeless kids, our children with IEPs, and really get those students into safer spaces where they can resume instruction. A lot of these institutions also, the ones I'm talking about sort of as satellites, also have staff that have some experience either in education programming or with the Department of Education and schools, and could actually provide supplemental resources and services for our young people. So we could be doing that now, and we're not doing it. And I think that's highly problematic. In the long term, you know, there's a lot that we need to do differently in terms of using the city as a classroom, and getting our kids to understand the world around them, and transforming the curriculum. But right now, in terms of the, you know, the crisis that we're dealing with, we should really be thinking outside of the box. And we should be accessing the other resources in our communities that might serve as you know, really strong alternatives for what is happening right now, where our students and teachers are both lagging behind, and also, I think, not necessarily working in the safest conditions.
Switching gears to real quick, Dianne, to talk about the economy real quick, because obviously that's the other
Okay.
issue. So, you know, people, small businesses are just absolutely been devastated
Yeah.
by what's been going on, you know, whether it
Yes.
be, whatever it be. With restaurants, you can talk about, other mom and pop shops, you can talk about anything. Everybody's been feeling the pain. We've also heard a lot about, especially from other candidates in this race now, regarding universal basic income, making sure people have money just to even start off with. They're two separate questions, but it all comes together when it comes to the economy here.
Sure.
What do you do to help small businesses, and where do you stand on the issue of a guaranteed minimum income? I think is what you call it.
It is what I've called it. So let me just say this. My campaign is based on the need, the idea of us needing to, you know, we talked earlier about, like, I don't want to go back. We're not going to go back. We need to create a New York City. So that includes actually creating a new framework for our economy. Right now, we depend on and we rely so much on, you know, big businesses, big corporations, as our saviors, right? When we talk about the economy right now, there's a lot of fear mongering around businesses, big businesses leaving the city, and what are we going to do? The reality of it is that our small and mid-sized businesses account for 50% of the New York City workforce. And so we could make a conscious decision that we're going to focus and we're going to prioritize that 50%. Because, you know, if we provided the tax incentives and the tax subsidies and abatements to small and mid-sized businesses that we are so eager all the time to provide to large-scale corporations, that could actually be a game changer for them in terms of getting them back on their feet and helping them to, you know, bring that 50% of the workforce back to work, which in turn, it allows that 50% to invest in the local economy. We need to localize our economy. We need to invest locally and not continue to emphasize the investments on corporations that come in, use our labor, and extract our wealth from our communities. So I'm a big believer in the idea of investing locally. We saw last year what tax relief did to large-scale corporations. We saw the impact on Wall Street. We saw the impact on the growth of the number of billionaires in this country. We know what that impact is. It's positive. Why don't we invest locally instead? And that would be a game changer for us. And that would be my leading sort of entry point into the economy. In terms of the question around guaranteed minimum income, I don't think it's a silver bullet. And I certainly don't advocate the idea of us doing that in lieu of other safety net programs and social services. But I do think it is a critical pillar in beginning to stabilize people and get them back on track. And we need to provide for people to be able to survive, right? The emphasis needs to be on saving our people, and allowing them to survive, and then moving them from survival to the ability to thrive. And I think it's a process, but for me, the guaranteed minimum income is about that stabilizing factor that we so desperately need right now.
I think that's a good point, because a lot of people look at that and say, "Oh, that's good. That'll fix everything. Just give a bunch of people a bunch of money." It's not going to fix everything. There's a lot of other
Yeah.
things that have to go with that on top of it. So
Yeah,
that's good.
yeah, and it's not. I mean, it's not something that can be sustained over time.
Mhm.
It really should be sort of seen as a bridge or a pathway to something longer term and bigger for those people too. Because otherwise, we're just saying this should be enough. Be happy with these crumbs that we're throwing you, and stop talking about it. But I'm talking about it as a bridge to something bigger and more stabilizing and more dignified for people, because I think that's what everybody really wants.
Dianne, have you given any thought, or has it crossed your mind yet, regarding, if you were to be elected, the historical significance, the social significance of you becoming mayor and taking that role as a leader of this city and city hall, and what would that would just mean to you, and what would that mean to the people of New York City?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, and it's an honor and it's a privilege to think about this. I think that um, I knew it intellectually when I jumped into this race, and I think representation matters, both from sort of like people being able to see someone who looks like them, but also people being able to see someone who has so many experiences in common with their lived experiences. But throughout the course of this race, it's really been humbling to experience that the number of young people, young women of color in particular, who express to me what it means to them to see me in this race, and to have me claim space in sort of an arena where women are not often welcomed or embraced or treated very kindly, or to sort of put a stake in the ground and say, no, I'm here, and we are here, and we will be heard and we will be represented, has been really, really extraordinary. At times, it's overwhelming to think about the responsibility. No matter what comes of this race, there is something to be said for sending a clear message that we are here, and want to be heard and represented. And I am, like I said, I'm very humbled by that. I'm very proud of that, and feel a tremendous sense of responsibility and accountability to the community by virtue of my doing this.
When I talk to candidates and we break down, why people are running, what the issues are, it sometimes gets into a situation where we feel like we're saying everything that's wrong with the city and everything that needs to be fixed with the city. But I feel like if you run for this spot and you want to become the mayor of New York City, you need to love this city, obviously. And there's got to be something about this city that makes you want to lead it and lead the people of it. For you, what is that factor? What is that thing that makes you say, I want to lead New York City into the future?
Yeah, I love that question. We have the best people in the world. New Yorkers are amazing. It's interesting that you frame it that way in terms of people talking about what's wrong. I actually, I talk about what I think is right, that I think we need to build on, and we have for so long ignored. And that is that the people that are closest to the challenges are also closest to the solution. Our communities are such powerful resources and assets in troubleshooting and problem solving. I mean, just look at what's happened over the last year. Our communities are taking care of each other. They have figured out how to do that at a time when the city government has failed them. And we have so much to learn from how they've done that, and what they've done, those practices and those networks and those systems. Even the movement, the protest movement, it's actually a perfect microcosm. What it takes to organize and plan a protest, and then there's always been a group of people that do the safety part of it. Actually, I was part of that, which is why I know. The marshals plan the safety, they plan the route, they plan how they're going to take care of each other. Then you've got the mutual aid groups that come in and they plan, where do we stop to provide the crowd with sustenance, with food and water. It's this beautiful microcosm of power and strength, that if the city tapped into that and figured out how to learn from that and how to replicate that, we could actually do so much better than we have these communities have held each other up at a time when the city failed them. So that's what inspires me, what really is on the ground, and what people are capable of in New York City is a powerful and beautiful thing. And that's what I want to bring to the city level. I think we should scale that. I think we should learn from that. And I think it's an extraordinary power and strength for New York.
All right, Diane, two quick fun questions for you before I
Okay.
wrap up with you, because I know you got to get to something else in just about 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to give you a chance to take a breather. Favorite restaurant in New York City? I'm putting you on the spot. What's your favorite restaurant in the city?
So I am a soul food girl. I really love soul food. So I'd probably say Sylvia's up in Harlem.
Okay, I'm finding a lot of great places. I love asking this question. And what is a fun fact about you? Something that people may not know about you, doesn't come across in campaign materials, but what's something people may not know about you you want them to know?
Okay. So, okay. I have an ear for language and accents, and I can't do this on command, but I'm actually pretty good at like mimicking other people's voices. And
Really?
sometimes, I'll be talking and I'll like be like, well, she said, and I'll like take on their accent or how they talk, and people will be kind of like, oh my God, you sound just like her. But it's not something I can like if you said to me, okay, do so and so right now, I'd be like, but in the moment as we're having conversations, I think that's one of the things that I tend to do that people get a real kick out of and are always really surprised by.
So you're not being asked to do impressions left and right, is what you're telling me. It's just,
Yeah,
it
no,
happens in
don't
the
ask me
moment.
to do an impression. Like if we're having conversation, it might just come out naturally, but I can't do it on command.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Diane, real quick, and this is the last thing I'll ask you. Obviously, people are going to be dealing here. This is ranked choice voting, so people can vote
Mhm.
for up to 5 candidates here. They can put
Yeah.
names. We saw you just last week getting I thought very interesting as far as the co-endorsement from Gustavo Rivera. I haven't seen that before. I think that was very indicative of what's going to happen here as we go forward. That people are going to be endorsing multiple candidates. For you, what do you want people to remember about you when they head in there to cast their vote, whether it be by mail or whatever it's going to be? What do you
Mhm.
want them to remember about you that's going to make them put your name down as one of those 5 candidates they can vote for?
Mhm. That's a great question too. I want them to remember a couple of things. I want them to feel like, oh, she knows what I've been through. She knows because she's been there. She's experienced these things that I've experienced. I also want them to remember she's spent her life helping others like me with their challenges, and she's been really good at it. So she can do something for the city to help us all. I think those things are critical. And I'd also say she sees us. She sees us, and she's focused on and is prioritizing us and me, for the voter, right? Because I just don't think that we've had that before. I'm not part of the political establishment or the machine. I don't have a national platform. The only persons I'm accountable to are people from the community. Those are the people that have made it possible for me to be in and to stay in this race. And those are the people that I'm going to represent in City Hall.